Muslim women. In fact, it is all of this and more that constitutes our Muslim identity and defines its features. On today's program, we will explore what is involved in undertaking the journey towards recognition, fulfillment, and ultimately pride and confidence in our Muslim identity. Joining me today are my guests, Maliha Shahid Saiba. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
And Amreen Khan Saiba. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
So before we begin our discussion today, let's listen to what people had to say when we asked them, is a faith-based identity important?
I do think it makes people happier. I don't think it's important in terms of you can't make people do it, but ultimately you can have faith in a variety of things, not just the basic religions.
Yes, I do. Faith is very important.
Yes and no. I don't think it really matters. I don't think it really matters to have to have identification behind things. I think it's you can do whatever you want to do, and you don't have to go around exploiting it or telling people hey, this is me. I'm this. I do this. I do this. I think it's just something that you can do on your own time, and if it comes up in conversation, you can continue the conversation. But I don't think it's something that has to be exploited.
Welcome back. Indeed, there are so many ways that we can integrate faith into our identity. So let's start at the beginning. Let's define the word. What is identity? And what are the different facets or aspects that are associated with this one word? Let me start with you, Maliha Saiba.
Identity is something that's very personal. It's a combination of who we are, how we see ourselves, and how we are seen by others. But it's important to note that there's many layers to each component of our identity. For example, if we just take that instance of who we are, it comprises of things like our race, our gender, and even our citizenship. And a lot of these things we have no control over. They're actually circumstances that we're born into. Whereas the other aspects of our identity, how we see ourselves and how we are seen by others, those actually develop and evolve as we go through life.
So what is a Muslim identity? What does it mean? Let me ask you, Amreen Saiba.
Well, it's an identity that's based on our Islamic faith. Now, Islam is a very comprehensive religion. It covers all aspects of our lives, which means often our Muslim identity may be confused for just the way we look or dress, but it's much more than that. It's things like our Islamic names, our etiquettes, what we eat and drink to what we refrain from consuming. So in this sense, our identity and our Muslim identity shouldn't be thought of as two separate things, but rather they should be one and fused together.
Absolutely. Now, Allah Almighty says in the Holy Quran, chapter 6, verse 163, say, verily my prayers, my sacrifices, my living and my dying are for Allah, and I am the first of those who submit to Him. So this verse talks about what our ultimate goal should be as Muslims, and we derive guidance from our faith for every step that we take in our lives. And then this faith begins to form our identity. So how does one begin to develop this Muslim identity? Where do we start? Let me ask you, Maliha Saiba.
Well, for those of us born into Muslim families, our Muslim identity begins developing from the moment we are born, right from the instance when adhan, which is the Muslim call to prayer, is recited into the ear of a newborn. And the second Khalifa, Lihatlah anhu, has said that this isn't just a simple act, but rather the words and the meaning of the adhan have a great impact on the mind of a child. Later on, as we grow up, we're taught small building blocks of our faith as well, through our upbringing. And this also helps to develop that Muslim identity.
What do you think, Amreen Saiba?
Well, I also think it begins early on. So for instance, we can take a look at our Islamic names that we are given. This helps shape our identity from the onset. And if we look at our converts, for instance, many of them choose to take on an Islamic name, and that's recognition of their identity, their Muslim identity beginning to take shape. Now, Maliha Saiba, you just mentioned that we're taught the building blocks of our faith through our upbringing. So, in a sense, we can say that our parents may have helped us develop the fundamentals, the beginning, the foundation of our Muslim identity. But then we all reach a point in time as we grow older where we have to decide if we are going to continue to build upon that foundation or we're just going to let it sit there. And it reminds me of that question of, are we continuously learning our faith or have we just inherited it?
Mhm.
If I can just add, you mentioned that phrase about learning your faith and not just inheriting it. And I immediately thought of the second Khalifa, Radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and that when he was a child of just 11 years old, he actually investigated the claims of his father, the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, and instead of just blindly accepting him. And we can take great inspiration from this, that, to work on your Muslim identity, it takes great effort on our part. And our parents, they may help us to get started on this journey, but just like when we're being taught how to walk at a young age, they can only hold our hand for so long before we have to take that first step on our own. And from this we can see that those steps that we take on our own, that's what really strengthens our faith and builds that Muslim identity.
Absolutely. And I agree that, it is a journey. It's a work in progress. It's not something that we're given and that's it. As you said, it's something that we continue to work on and we have to pour a lot of effort into it because it is of such great value to have that. So why is having a Muslim identity important? Let me ask you, Ambreen Saiba.
Firstly, the concept of having an identity and being confident in it is a universal goal. It's widely understood. It's the reason why when we hear people who have gone through an identity crisis, they'll often share how they felt unbalanced. It was a time of inner turmoil for them. So when it comes to having a Muslim identity, I think it only holds importance if we know who we are and we're confident in it. And this is because life is filled with so many tests and trials that having that strong sense of our identity will help us to navigate through these challenges with peace of mind.
Absolutely. What do you think, Maliha Saiba?
Well, we know that Islam is a practical religion and its commandments are full of wisdom. And once we understand this and truly believe it, it not only gives us confidence in our Muslim identity, but it helps us to navigate through life in a peaceful way, regardless of whatever societal pressures we may face. For example, as Muslim women, we know not to shake hands with men. And whenever we find ourselves in, facing this dilemma, having that strong Muslim identity is so important, both internally and externally. Because when our Muslim identity is made visible or known to others, whether that's through wearing the hijab or conducting ourselves in a modest manner, we're giving off these social cues, which really do help us in avoiding altogether being placed in certain situations where we do have to, make that decision. But even if we have to be in that situation, we're still able to respectfully decline just because of our visible, display of our identity. And this is something that, like, having that strong Muslim identity, it really helps in these challenging times because we understand that every Islamic teaching is based on so much wisdom that it's in our betterment to follow those commandments. And regardless of whatever anyone may say or the pressures we may face, we're able to hold true to our identity.
Absolutely, I agree. I feel like the Muslim identity can be divided into two parts. And I know we were talking about this a little bit earlier. You referred to that. There's the physical aspect, the visible appearance that identifies us with the Islamic faith. And then there's the spiritual or the mental identity, where one can understand the concepts of their faith and develop a real relationship, a living relationship with their creator, Allah Almighty. So, do both of these go hand in hand? And is having one of these enough? Let me ask you, Ambreen Saiba.
Yes, I would say these two definitely go hand in hand. And I mentioned earlier that Islam is a comprehensive religion. It covers all aspects of our lives, and there's wisdom behind every single commandment, which includes both the commandments that require an outward display of our faith and those that require an inner belief. Now, naturally, the first step is to start with one, but the ideal goal is to have both. So let's take the example of the hijab for women, for instance. Now, many of us may have started donning the hijab because we reached a certain age or we saw our mothers or elders do so. And there's nothing wrong with that first step. But I would argue that if that's the reason why we wear the hijab today, then it's nothing more than just a cloth over our heads. And I say this because it's not until we understand the wisdom behind this commandment, and in this case, it's the teachings of modesty. When we truly understand why we do this, then that gives us that inner conviction, and then we exude that confidence. And then it doesn't become just a cloth over our heads, it's actually becomes a way of life for us. It's how we act and interact with others as well.
Absolutely.
If I can just add, a while ago, our beloved Hazur Aidatala bin Nasl Aziz recently addressed Waqf No girls, and he asked us to, proudly proclaim the fact that we take pride in our modest dress and take pride in our hijab and in keeping a distance from men, and to tell the world that the hijab is not a restriction, but rather it's a protection afforded to us by God Almighty. And we can only do this if we truly believe in the wisdom behind the actions we're portraying to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's when every part of us is on the same page. Our inner self, it's matching our outer self. And that's when your Muslim identity, it moves beyond just being a label. And like Ambreen Sahiba was saying, our identity is complete with that both of the, inner belief and that outer display.
Yeah, so both those concepts go hand in hand.
Definitely.
So before we continue, let's listen to more on the topic of Islamophobia today.
A phobia is defined as an exaggerated, usually illogical fear of a particular object, class of objects, or situation. It may be hard for the afflicted to sufficiently determine or communicate the source of this fear, but it exists. In recent years, a specific phobia has gripped the Western societies: Islamophobia. Gallup collected data in 2008 from representative samples in Germany, France, and the UK, focusing on several issues related to the social and cultural integration of Muslim communities in these three countries. And while majority of the adults in these three countries agree that people from minority groups enrich the cultural life of their nations, sizable minorities of these respondents express fear about certain aspects of Muslim culture. Significant proportions of the French, German, and the British public consider different Muslim practices and relationships threatening. For example, 16% of Germans, 30% of British, and 39% of French say that wearing the hijab, the traditional head covering worn by Muslim women, is a threat to European culture. Similar proportions associate Muslims with terror, as 23% of Germans, 25% of the French, and 34% of the British say that Muslims are sympathetic to Al-Qaeda. Between 16 and 21% of people in France, Germany, and the UK say that they would not like Muslim as their neighbors. Within key Western societies, there are genuine negative perceptions, prejudices, and discriminations targeted against Muslims. Seeing Muslims as not loyal, voicing prejudice against Muslims, and avoiding Muslims as neighbors are all symptoms of Islamophobia that exist in the West. However, it is important to note that these feelings do not characterize Western countries. They are generally shared by a subset of the general population, though they exist in substantial enough numbers to draw both attention and concern. This highlights the concern that the very existence of Islamophobia is something to be addressed.
Indeed, Islamophobia is a very real concern, and it does need to be addressed at every level. And I believe that as Ahmadi Muslim women, it's up to us to take that lead and to address it starting from the individual level, the personal level. What advice would you give to somebody who is now growing up in this society, perhaps going through these challenges and struggling to find that confidence and that pride in their Muslim identity? Let me ask you, Ambreen Sahiba.
Well, I think the only way to be confident in your Muslim identity is to know if you want to have one to begin with. And I say this because growing up in this Western society is a challenge. We are constantly being faced with societal pressures, and we need to make an active choice on whether we want to navigate through these challenges with a Muslim identity. Because it's very easy to conform to societal pressures and hide our Muslim identity. It's easy to tell people to call us Mo instead of Muhammad or Amber instead of Ambreen. But we need to realize that there's nothing about our Muslim identity that makes us inferior to others. And if anything, it's okay to be different. And it actually gives us a step up when we're strong in our Muslim identity because we know that there's wisdom and logic behind every aspect of our faith, and we will derive benefit from that. So I think once we understand this and we come to terms with this, for those that may be struggling to develop a strong sense of pride in their Muslim identity, then it's important to ask questions because God tells us that, not to be blind believers, to ponder over his teachings. And we live in a really interesting time because we're understanding the wisdom of our Islamic teachings in light of scientific research and societal changes. Things like the benefits of fasting or the harms of alcohol or even the dangers of social intermingling between genders. So the fact that we've known about these things for the past 1400 years and people are only figuring that out now, you can't help but feel a sense of pride in that. And I just want to say that, at the end of the day, when we stand proud of who we are, we actually add to the mosaic of our society. And we'd actually be doing a disservice when we try to be like everyone else.
Absolutely.
I actually completely agree. And if I may add, in terms of practical steps in establishing and strengthening our Muslim identity, it's to build a connection with Allah Almighty and to have our own conviction in that belief that He exists. So often in our daily life, we check in with our friends, whether it's through messaging them or calling them. And so we're building that connection with our friends. But what are we doing with our relationship with God, our greatest friend, Al-Wali? And so we should really be trying to establish that connection with Him. And one way to actually do that is to pray to God and to speak to God in our prayers. And another way we can do that is to build a connection with, his Khalifa, our beloved Hazur Ayatollah bin Nasr Aziz. And so we can write him letters and also ask him for prayers. Mm-hmm. And if we're still struggling to have confidence and pride in our Muslim identity, we have to take a look at the people we surround ourselves with. It's well known that who we most associate with, that's what we're known for. We take on their colors. Mm-hmm. Just like if you were to walk into a perfume store, even if you don't buy anything, you're still walking out with those scents lingering on you. And there's actually a story from the promised Messiah Islam's time that there was a young student whose mind was affected by agnostic thinking. And the promised Messiah Islam told him that he should just change his seat in class. And this small change was the cure to his agnostic thoughts. Mm-hmm. And from this, I instantly see the impact your environment has on your outcome. Mm-hmm. And so if we're trying to build, a strong Muslim identity, we need to surround ourselves with people who are confident and have pride in that identity. And inshallah, it will have a positive effect on us.
Absolutely. In fact, it is actually, like you have said, a multitude of different aspects that help us build that confidence. You mentioned the blessing of Khilafat in our lives, and Alhamdulillah, as Ahmadi Muslims, we're so fortunate to be bonded together and unified under the institution of Khilafat. So how does coming under the banner of Khilafat-e-Ahmadiyya promote our sense of pride as Muslims and in our Muslim identity? Let me ask you, Ambreen Sahiba.
Well, for me personally, when I take a look at the timeline of world religions and all the prophecies that were revealed, I then begin to understand the incredible value of Ahmadiyyat. So I want to take a moment to unpack this and realize the magnitude of this. The fact that people are still waiting for that second coming. And then we look at the Muslim Ummah, who they're still waiting. They're waiting for that Messiah Mahdi, but they're so lost. They're so divided. And then here we are as Ahmadi Muslims who've accepted the Messiah of the age for the past 130 years. And over this time, we've been peacefully united and spiritually guided under this banner of Khilafat. When I look at it from this lens, I can't help but feel a strong sense of pride in this. Like, that's incredibly powerful.
Absolutely, indeed it is. What do you think, Maria?
I think another reason to feel pride in our Muslim identity as Ahmadi Muslim women is to realize that Islam championed women's rights and it pioneered female empowerment right from its onset in 610 AD. And it's in the Ahmadiyya Muslim communities that we see this so beautifully personified through that perfect example of Lajna-e-Maila, which is an auxiliary organization for women aged 15 and above. And so through this, we actually are given leadership opportunities and we conduct and organize our events and initiatives without being under the shadow of men. And, so often when we hear those stereotypes of Muslim women being oppressed, we should feel lucky that as Ahmadi Muslim women, we are able to live our lives according to the true teachings of Islam, which empowers women.
And if I can just add on here, I just want to recognize that we have an incredible amount of privilege living here in the West. So in a sense, our sense of pride here is very easy, especially when it's contrasted with our Ahmadi brothers and sisters in different countries who are facing persecution for their faith. We're talking about countries who prohibit Ahmadis from calling their places of worship a mosque, or prohibit Ahmadis from saying the Islamic greeting, Assalamu alaikum, to each other. These are our Ahmadis who are, they're unable to call themselves Muslims without the risk of facing legal, repercussions. And then, here we are, seeing how we're trying to develop a strong sense of confidence in our identity. And here they are, never taking that opportunity to denounce their faith. They'll never compromise on that. The juxtaposition between these two things is just interesting, to say the least. And I think we should be grateful that we have this freedom here, and we should draw inspiration from these Ahmadis around the world who, even in severe persecution, even in torture, even in years of prison, they'll never denounce their faith. And that is true pride. That's the type of confidence that we need to strive for in our Muslim identity.
Inculcate in ourselves, indeed. And as Canadian Ahmadis, we're grateful to have that opportunity to be able to exercise our faith and to maintain our identity in all the ways. Alhamdulillah, we've been able to have a very meaningful discussion today. Jazakallah for taking the time to be with us. Any last thoughts before we go?
Well, my last thought is something that's actually my first thought whenever going through anything, and it's to remember God and to pray. Pray for guidance, pray for the wisdom that we understand the beautiful teachings of Islam, pray for the courage and confidence in establishing our Muslim identity. But to end off there, we should make sure that our prayers aren't empty and that we're opening channels for God to work through. We've heard that story of the man who left his camel without securing it. And the Holy Prophet ﷺ said to him, tie your camel first and then put your trust in Allah. So yes, make sure that you put God first, but you also have to make sure that you're putting in those efforts. You're working hard at it, and then put your trust in God to do the rest.
What do you think, Amreen Saiba?
Well, for the youth watching, I just like to say that when you get older, people will actually respect you for being proud of who you are. And people won't actually like it when you try to be like someone you're not. People can tell when you're not being authentic. And we can't expect people to accept us if we haven't even accepted ourselves. And we're constantly told to win over the hearts of people. We can't really do that if we haven't won over our own hearts. So I just want to say that I know it's easy for us to talk here. I know it's easy to listen to these programs, but the real tests for us all come when we're outside, when we're going through these challenges of life, and our Muslim identity is being put to the test. And no one is there to see what we're doing except for God. So, with that, I pray that may Allah give us all the utmost strength to be confident in who we are and give us the courage to be proud of our Ahmadi Muslim identity. Ameen.
Ameen. Inshallah, inshallah. That brings us to the end of our program. I will end with a verse of the Holy Quran that paints a picture of who the true Muslims are. True believers are only those whose hearts tremble when the name of Allah is mentioned, and when His signs are recited to them, they increase their faith, and who put their trust in their Lord, who observe prayer and spend out of that which we have provided for them. These it is who are true believers. They have grades of rank with their Lord as well as forgiveness and an honorable provision. May Allah Almighty enable us to become the true picture of Ahmadi Muslims. Ameen. Allahumma ameen. Jazakum Allah ta'ala wa asan al jaza. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
हर तरफ फिक्र को दौड़ा के थकाया